Good morning.
Rabbi, good morning. How are you?
Doing
Um,
wonderful. Thank you.
well, I'm looking forward to this to Friday to a discussion today, and Shabbos starting in a few hours.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll get some later Sabbaths soon.
Uh-huh. So, thank you for the conversations from yesterday, and I was thinking about that. I have a follow-up question. So, the first one we saw where Jesus, the temptation was to use this to prove his miracle worker had. And so, but he answered that from the sophist's hat, and he turned the question on his head. The second, the second temptation was will he use his power, or will he use his physical world to meet or will he use his power to meet his physical needs? But the way Jesus framed his answer, right? It feels like he turned the question from the devil as a test to him versus a question from the devil as a test to God. And do you his response was, again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to test. In this case, he's saying you shall not put God to a test, right? Which he's saying you're not putting me to a test, but by putting this to me, you're putting God to a test, right? And like, do you is there a, like do you I
Well, I
mean
told you, yeah, I mean, they're using the word test ambiguously, right? We talked about
Yeah.
yesterday how there's two different meanings of test. We pointed out how in Deuteronomy, it specifically means to sin. If
Hmm.
you sin, you are testing God. Over here, the way it's using the Psalm 91, it's actually saying that Psalm 91 you could review as a prophecy or as a promise that you'll never be injured if you're doing the work of God. So he's saying test God by seeing if you'll injure yourself. So it's
So
a different
that
usage.
yeah, so that's a claim put forth by the devil. The you know it's a devil who quoted Psalm 91, and Jesus is saying, by quoting this verse, you're not so much putting me to a test, you're putting God to a test. As in, he shifted the focus from him, as in what he can or he cannot do, to saying because of this verse you've quoted, it's more about you questioning God, and so that makes the question redundant, as in that's not even a right thing. That's a moot point.
Yeah, again, it's interesting how they use the word test the way that we probably mean test today. The way Deuteronomy uses test is not the way that we would say it. It's almost like if you have a parent and the kid won't come home by curfew, and he
Hmm.
keeps going partying every night,
Hmm.
and the parent screams out to God, "Why do you test me so?" It's more like along those lines as opposed to physically test the parent.
Yeah.
Where in this situation, the way that Satan is using it is to physically test. Like, if this is a promise by God, and if you're the son of God, if you're the son of God, you should have the highest level of divine intervention in your life, and therefore you shouldn't be able to be injured.
This reminds me of Maimonides and Rabbi Sachs, how language defines our view of God, or our understanding of God. And because human language is limited in what we can describe, we don't have a way to describe, like, I don't know. I mean, to your point, the word test is so ambiguous. And so, like, what does it mean to test God? And like, I do not know if a concept like that exists, and if you have language to,
Well, we definitely
to.
the verb exists in the Bible, and
Mhm.
again, I think we generally know what the word test means. I just think there's different ways to test someone. You could test someone surreptitiously to set up a whole way for them to kind to conquer the mountain, if you were.
But
But there's just different ways to test.
Yeah, but we cannot test a God, right? I mean, so we can test human beings. I see what he's saying. Test has got multiple aspects to it,
You
but
could
this.
test God if you want to. It's not like you can't. For example, if God makes a promise that, let's imagine that he says, if you keep the sabbatical year for 6 cycles, then seventh cycle, I'll make sure that your food is taken care of when you have to have the land lay famine. So I feel that's in rabbinic text. That's a famous case where
But
God
he's
says, "Test me, test me."
but he's not. So again, so this goes back to Maimonides and human language. Just because like he's not obligated, like God being God. Like if you take God to be a completely different being,
I don't know if God makes a promise though. Shouldn't God have to keep that promise?
so God is God, and I mean, I
I'm
see what
sorry.
he's.
Are you trying to argue that God does not have to keep his promises? Is that what you're trying to put forward right now?
No, the point I'm making is I don't know, right? So I
But
mean, as
why
much.
don't you know? Why don't you know? I feel like
So
I'll say it. Watch this. God
yeah.
has to keep his promises. I have no problem saying that. And if God doesn't keep his promises, at what point do we see that he's an omnibenevolent being? It's very easy to not keep your promises. keeping your promises is hard. And if you're atemporal, it's even easier to keep your promises because at least you should be able to see into the future without having any impediments. So I don't know why you're scared to say God has to keep his promises. I find this surprising.
I need to think about that a bit more right now. It's in this
So why do
context.
you have to think about it? I just want to hear. I think that's the question. What do you have to think about?
So is God required, like by so if God doesn't, if he says something and if he changes, or if is he required to keep his promises? What if he doesn't?
Of
Right?
course, he's required to keep his promises. What kind of so you're worshiping the lying God? Like
No, I
again, I
mean,
don't understand this attitude. A God that does not keep his promises is
I'm
not a
not saying
God who's
no.
worthy of worship, in
Well,
my
okay,
opinion.
well.
It's not even ambiguous. It's not
Okay,
even a question.
okay. This is we're probably going to a completely different topic. I need to think a bit more about that before I can
I
even.
find this mysterious. Okay.
So God makes promises. This goes back to human language and how we use language. Humans expect that we say something, we would do the word, and God, by definition, is true and He's holy and He's truthful. But I don't think so. It's God who defines its own perimeter. He says, because I'll do this because I said so, and not because I have to, and because I care about my name and what it is, right? But that's again, it's communicated through human language. And so let's say if God says, I want to do something, he does something, again, this is speaking from anthropomorphic terms. Okay. And then God changes. I mean, my
Well,
point.
listen again. Like I'm not here to tell you about what it means for God to change, because obviously Christians will have different attitudes towards God manifesting Himself at different times in history. So for sure, but it just seems to me that you need to understand why would He not keep promise. So let me give you like two examples. In Deuteronomy, it says, if you do A, B, and C, I'll give you your rain in your time, I'll give you your crop in your time, your babies won't die. So the question is that a promise? So if that's a promise, we could say without any problem that wasn't kept. So I view that as a blessing. So a blessing is something like, oh, may you have lots of babies. And God will say a blessing like, that I hope you'll do this. I'll help you do this. But a promise is more like a prophecy in my eyes, that where he says that there will be a time when the Messiah comes. So if a Messiah never comes, God is a liar and not worthy of our worship,
Yeah, that's
because
okay. Yeah, okay, that's a very broad Messiah will
okay,
come.
I'll,
Okay,
I'll I'll
that's
be
a
more
very
specific promises
that's a
if you want.
very broad promise. People have been waiting for that for how many years? The 3,000 years, 4,000 years.
Okay, but what if we found
It's
out
so right.
it's so interesting because even that promise, there's a famous guy named Michelle Leibowitz who he believes that any Messiah who comes is a false Messiah. He actually says the belief in the even now I'm just pointing out even that belief seems to be undermined by some, that the whole idea of Messiah is that we have to look towards a utopian better society, and any human
Mhm.
being that's not looking towards that utopian better society is already inherently failing as a human being. So
Okay.
interesting. Okay, well, okay, listen, I'm
Yeah.
actually going to turn this one off, and we'll start another one.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.